Hey there, welcome back to another video. Today we got a C6. This is out of a 76 extended cab F250, and this one came from a customer who I've done several C6s before. He's kind of like a Ford truck restoration specialist. He knows these trucks very well. And the situation with this thing is that it was in this 76 crew cab. Previous owner had built up the engine real nice and then melted it down. I guess one of the cylinders or one of the pistons literally melted down in the engine. So hopefully there's no damage to the transmission, but we'll see. As you know, these are all non-lockup converters, so apparently it happened while cruising on the highway, and unfortunately that's all my customer knows. So he's going to rebuild the engine, go back together with it, and have this all, nice and new as well. So we'll go ahead and get started. I'm not going to, boil the ocean with a whole bunch of talking. I'm just kind of flow through this case, and, I want to get it apart and see what we're up against when it comes to potential damage. Customer did pressure wash the case, so it might have some residual water in it. So just be aware of that. It wasn't stored outside or anything, or, as far as I know, it wasn't subject to the elements. Just got a little bit of water in it from the pressure washing. Alright, there's two more bolts down here, so kind of got to duck down to get them. I'm not sure if you can see it. But the fluid looks brand new. So somebody had done a service on this thing probably in the very recent past. Okay, turn the output shaft. It should spin freely in both directions, though it's going to take a lot more effort to spin against engine rotation, which would be counterclockwise, though. From our point of view, we're spinning it clockwise, but this is against engine rotation. Okay. 3/8 on these governor bolts. So you have your governor to governor support. Just make note of where the large governor valve is positioned. It has the notch here on the support, and that's how you know which way it goes back together. These governors are pretty resilient. Not a whole lot of issues with them. Assuming that there's not some sort of catastrophic failure event that would have otherwise impacted the governor. But you just want to make sure that these valves are moving freely. I mean, that's really your primary objective here. And as long as they're moving like they should, the governor itself should not be a source of concern or issue when you're going back with it. Alright, let me fish for my 1/2 inch. So you got a nut and a crush washer, and this is for your kick down lever, your downshift lever. And that just comes off. You want to make sure that you have good contact between the internal lever and the kick down valve, and you'll know that by just simply actuating the lever, when you reassemble it. And that's filthy. Alright, that can stay on there for now. Alright, so pump. Again, not a source of major issues typically with respect to these pumps. Alright, 1/2 inch. So we see some RTV on the pump, RTV on the pan. It's not good. I do not like to use RTV on transmissions at all, unless it's specifically called for by the factory or by a technical manual like the ATSG. So it looks like a lot of silicone actually. I mean, this looks like stuff you'd use, you know, in your shower or bathtub or something. Okay, shaft spinning freely. I'm grabbing the output shaft, spinning the input shaft. Okay, it's laden with fluid obviously, but there's no hard bond between the two, meaning the output shaft is, you know, remaining still when I'm spinning the input shaft. And that's what you want to do. Alright, 1/2 inch on the excuse me, on the servo cover. This has the L-coated servo in it. Someone, I believe, has rebuilt this transmission before. That's what the customer also suspects. So we'll know for sure once we get inside of it. It would be nice if a shift kit was installed, like a Transgo shift kit SK6. We're going to be installing a Sonex R-code servo in this position here. I'm not a fan of most of the factory servos, just simply because they're usually undersized or, you know, kind of underpowered, so to speak, for most of the applications today. I mean, engines are making a lot more power, so, you know, you need a lot more apply surface area than what you did back then. Okay, this will be replaced with the R code, but if you're going back with the original servo, what you need to do is make a note of your cover so that the hard part supplier will sell you the correct bonded servo piston. So it's bonded steel and rubber. This must always be replaced on overhaul regardless. Okay. It's rare this spring breaks, but every once in a while I'll see it. And then you're going to have your seal here. Just check the bore and then check the sealing surface here where my finger is. I mean, you know, you want your apply side, no scoring, has to be nice and smooth, same with the release side. Okay, if either has scoring, just get a different cover, or like I said, upgrade to the Sonex R servo. Now, there are certain C6s, very early models, that will not accept the Sonex servo without machine work. I'll flash the you know, the years on the screen so that you know what they are, but just be aware of that, because, you know, you go to install it and it won't go in, then, well, you'll have issues obviously. Alright, vacuum modulator. A lot of issues can be traced to the modulator system, so always replace the modulator itself, and then you want to make sure you're getting adequate engine vacuum to the modulator so that the transmission can function, because otherwise you will have drivability symptoms that are really not related to the transmission or caused by the transmission. It'll be a result of poor engine vacuum signal. And this modulator valve is not wanting to come out. Okay, here it comes. Check your modulator valve. There's a lot of drag like what we see here. Okay, this is real draggy, at least at the mouth of the you know, the bore. Then a little bit of polishing with bench buddies should clean that up. And you can also chuck this valve up into a vise and, you know, take like 1,000 or 1,500 grit sandpaper, little WD-40, and clean it up as well. Okay. I'm going to take loose that band adjustment screw. Basically, you're going to dislodge the lock nut. And 13/16. Alright, and this will free up the band. Now, you will have a new lock nut in the overhaul kit. So you don't need to reuse these. They do have sealing surfaces on the inside, and you know, they get worn just like any other sealing surface. As you can see, this one is pretty much coming apart in my hand, and it's hardened already. I'm surprised it wasn't leaking from there. So sometimes I'll save these lock nuts for use on other things that have nothing to do with transmissions. Good for that, I guess. Input shaft. Note that your long splines go inboard. Alright, I'm gonna flip this thing over so we can get it to pan, get the valve body off, and everything else, and start moving through the case. Alright, so somebody welded a little bung here and has a, I guess what looks like a cooler line fitting, improvised drain plug. So pan was off, fluid was drained, and then he put the bolts back on. So we do expect the bolts to be loose. And we see some burnt clutch material, some signs of applied element damage, soft part damage. Like I said, the engine was melted down, so my guess is somebody was hot rodding this truck at some point. So let's see what the pan looks like. And so we have a pan that's hard and fast like this. Maybe he didn't take these off. Maybe he drained that fluid in another way, possibly through the dipstick tube. When you have a pan hard and fast like this, you want to always take a flat blade screwdriver that does not have any grooves in it, and you want to put it on the pan side of the gasket at a bowl hole location. If you put it over here on the case side in the middle, it's a possibility, depending on how stuck this thing is to the case, that you can bend the pan and or damage the pan rail and the sealing surface on the case. So you always want to stick the screwdriver at a bolt hole location, because even if you bend the pan a little bit here, as soon as you torque down that bolt, it'll straighten that pan, flatten it right back out. Okay, whole lot of mess. Nasty. Alright, so to separate the valve body from the case, you're only going to take out these bolts, these bolts, these bolts, and these bolts. Everything else is going to stay on the valve body assembly, including the rest of the filter to valve body bolts. So 3/8. And these two bolts are going to be a little longer. Somebody put non-standard bolts over there. They might be 7/16. That was a little sloppy. Alright, so the one thing I recommend you do, regardless of what vintage you're working on, this happens to be a 1974 unit, and I'll flash the Ford's codification on the screen so you know how to find and interpret those alphanumeric codes to determine the year production. But basically, get this some of this fluid out. On the valve body, you'll see RF and then dash D5AP. D indicates the decade of production. C is 60s, D is 70s. 5 indicates the year of production, so this will be 1975. A is the application, and it doesn't stand for application. There may be different letters here, but that's the either model, submodel, or vehicle family associated with this valve body. And then P is going to be the automatic transmission design office. So that fourth character indicates what design or engineering department within Ford Motor Company was responsible for the development and production of this part. Alright, so just kind of eyeballing everything we have in here. They have different band ratio levers as well. So here is your band strut. It's going to be your lever side. This is going to be the adjustment screw side. Just note how they went. So, like I said, you'll have different band levers. This is an E lever. The one thing that you don't want to do is max out with your band lever and use a superhold servo, you know, some large aftermarket servo, because that puts a ton of extra stress on this band, and it's not unheard of for not only the band to break, but more severely for the case itself to crack. So you got to watch out for that. So, you know, especially if the transmission's been worked on, people have been inside of it, kind of be prepared to make changes to things like band levers and you know, servos and things of that nature. You know, you want to protect the case. All right, let me get this up on a stand. All right, going to reposition the camera a little bit so that you can see directly into the case as we're taking stuff out. What I got to do is I got to put the input shaft back in, and then we're going to pull the pump out with our pump removal tool. Alright, and what I'll do is I will use the band to kind of grab on direct drum just to make sure it doesn't come out with the pump. And then at the same time, the input shaft acts as a stabilizer, allowing me to remove it safely. Alright, I mean, it'll collapse forward once it's fully free of the case. Sometimes you can get these out just by forcing on it like I did initially, but sometimes you got to use a removal tool. Alright, we'll look at the pump once everything else is out of the case. Alright, direct drum. So it's a selective washer. This looks like a factory washer. They are color coded like this. I'll flash a chart on the screen showing all the different color combinations for each of these selective washers. Okay, the band looks to be in decent shape. You know, it's not burnt. Forward drum. So here is your 4-tab washer, goes on the front planet. I'm sorry, front ring gear, not planet, ring gear. So here's the planet. These teeth look a little worn to me. I have some other planets I'll compare them to, but this looks like it probably should be replaced, at least at first glance. Sun shell. Alright, note the thrust washer that goes on the rear planet. There's 2 of them, one on the front, one on the back. These bushings look like they're new to me, or at least were replaced at some point in the past. Alright, so we have our rear gear set, snap ring here holding the planet in place, and then the low reverse clutch pack. You can take out your kickdown lever now if you'd like. Alright, then you have a nut. I'll reposition the case so that we can take that off and you can see it. So let me get that snap ring out of the way. Come on. So as you can see, a lot of signs of harsh contact. I mean, that in itself is not the end of the world. You know, if there's a little bit of scoring here, I mean, this, I don't want to say it's normal wear, but I don't think it's a showstopper. What you're really looking for are cracks. You want to see if there's cracks in the aluminum housing. Alright, you have your snap ring, so that has to come out. That holds the ring gear and ultimately the output shaft in place. I'll grab up both of these pliers, and I need them both. And there it goes. Okay. Alright, carefully remove your output shaft. I have literally barely enough room to get it out. Alright, and you have a snap ring here that holds your governor support and distributor in place. It's basically your distributor for both the governor and you know, back of the case here, low reverse, etc. And then you have your parking gears. So here is your rear ring gear, and you have a 3-tab thrust washer on the rear of it, and then you have the other thrust washer on the rear planet. So again, we'll look at these a little bit more carefully in a few minutes. Okay, so for your low reverse clutch hub, this clutch hub and the corresponding one-way clutch spins clockwise and locks counterclockwise. So if we see an E4OD 4R100 unified one-way assembly back here, we'll know that this thing's been going through. But if we still see the C6 aggregated one-way assembly where all the rollers are loose and whatnot, then the chances are it wasn't rebuilt. And this is the original one-way assembly. Okay, if it was rebuilt, they either reused it or they purchased replacement one-way assembly for the C6, which I don't recommend doing. I always recommend you use the E4OD part. Alright, let's get that other snap ring out of there and deal with the low reverse frictions, steels. Alright, end of the snap ring is right here. Gets our roughly the 4 o'clock or maybe 3:30 position in the case. Alright, so let's take a look at the low reverse clutch pack. Seems perfectly okay. At least the front side of it, or the rear side of it rather. It's the front side. Okay, you got 5 and 5 here. I mean, these look brand new to me. Alright, so now we're going to go ahead and reposition this case so that we can have the back of it facing us. Alright, we have our parking rod assembly we've got to take loose, then we have to take loose the nut for the selector shaft, and then get the oil distributor off. so that we can remove the parking gear and ultimately that inner race. And then once that inner race is removed, the return spring assembly will be removed, and then we can force the low reverse piston out with shop air. Half inch. So this is how it went with this kind of beveled side facing out, facing you. All right. This thing is 7/8. Yep. Alright, and then just kind of weave this so that you can free it from the parking rod, the parking pole rather. Alright, make note you're going to have an O-ring here that'll need to be replaced. And that was way too complicated, way too sloppy. Okay, 5/16 or 8mm on your detent roller. So this is how it goes into the case. You have this hook here facing, down into its slot in the case. All right, 1/2 inch on the distributor bolts. Alright, and then one thing you want to be mindful of is the parking pole, the parking gear is going to want to fall down. So, when you're prying this away, just make sure you have some decent purchase on that gear, and then carefully pry so that you can completely dislodge everything. It's going to sometimes want to get hung up here on the parking pole guide pin, and that'll fall to the ground along with the spring. That's no big deal. Main thing is I just didn't want the gear to fall. Alright, so check for sealing ring groove wear here in the distributor. Visual wear is perfectly fine, but physical wear is not. If it's got physical wear, it'll need to be replaced. Had a couple C6s relatively recently. Both of them had really worn out oil distributors there on the inner diameter. Okay. This side faces out, this side faces in toward this thrust washer here. And looks like it also wants to be a little bit difficult. Alright, I always recommend going back with these with a thrust washer kit, just simply because thrust washers, like anything else, wear, and when you have wear, that will introduce more spacing between the parts, and chances are you're going to be at the top end of spec or out of spec when it comes to case component travel. So you don't want to run an overly tight case, but you also don't want to run an overly loose case, and that's where replacing things like thrust washers will help you out and manage that spacing adequately. Okay. All right, these are 7/16. All right, and then I'm gonna just grab the race here because, like I said, I don't want it falling into the case. And then the main thing with this race, and in my humble opinion, this is, I guess, the highest risk part of the rebuild process, you know, where there's the most risk in making some sort of procedural error, and that is misaligning these lube holes. Okay, I'll be honest, I don't know if you can actually do it because of the bolt pattern. Maybe it's such that it will only bolt one way, but if you can, if it can bolt two ways and only one of those ways is correct, where you have alignment between the lube hole in the race and the lube hole in the case, and you know, if you put it on the other way, it's not aligned, and you're going to burn up the back of the case. Okay, you're going to destroy that rear roller clutch assembly. Okay, all those bolts are the same. And then back here, I always install a Sonex one-piece rear case bushing for these, the E4ODs, and the 4R100s. Okay, so for these early style C6s, you're going to have an independent return spring assembly for the low reverse, meaning all the springs are loose. So just be aware of that. Later models, they unified the assembly where they had a one-piece retainer with all the springs are kind of captured on that retainer. So there's a whole boatload of them in here. All right, now I'm gonna fire up the air compressor, and we're gonna go ahead and force that low reverse piston out of the case. All right, now go ahead and remove low reverse piston. Of course, it doesn't want to come out. So, with respect to these older C6s, in other words, pre-1976, they will have the bleed system for the low reverse clutch directly in the piston. In other words, there is no check ball in the valve body for low reverse. So, if you're working on a C6 and you need to replace anything, you need to make sure that you are pairing compatible parts with each other, meaning correct vintage of valve body, in other words pre-1976, must always be paired with a pre-1976 low reverse servo setup. I'm sorry, low reverse piston setup. So if you fail to do that, you will have a lot of problems with low reverse. If you put a valve body that has a bleed ball along with a piston that has a bleed ball in it, then you know you're going to have way too much bleed in that circuit. Likewise, too much bleed or not enough bleed. If you install a late model servo piston into an early case, you won't have any bleed and you'll bind up when you try to put it in drive or any forward range position. Okay, on the side here there's a selector tab. You can pluck that out with a small pry bar. All right, let me reposition the camera, get this case kind of out of the way a little bit. And then we'll start going through the sub-assemblies. Okay, first things first, we have our oil distributor So 3 sealing rings, they're of the butt cut style. And then we have our snap ring that holds everything in place. I really have the wrong snap ring pliers for this. I should have had those other ones over here. There it is. So just check the structure, check your splines, make sure they're not worn out, make sure none of them are cracked or broken, make sure that there's no cracks or other damage to this thing. I mean, it's a pretty straightforward deal, nothing too complicated. Okay, this surface you can check with a straight edge as well, just to make sure it's perfectly flat so you don't have leaks where the governor is bolted to it. Alright, we already looked at the parking here. Next is going to be your low reverse clutch hub. You will not reuse these snap rings once you take them out, because the E4OD 4R100 low roller assembly is too big to fit in here with snap rings. So you're going to take these out and just basically set them aside. Okay, as you can see, everything is loose in this assembly. And stupid rollers will want to go all over the place. So both of these snap rings have to come out. And the screwdrivers are marginally too big for what I'm trying to do here. Alright, consider that fully processed, ready for cleaning. With the sun shell, you want to inspect the lugs and the body. The body should not have any cracks in it, obviously. It should be structurally sound. The lugs should not have excessive wear here. Okay, sun shell in these transmissions is considered a hard part, so you don't necessarily have to separate the sun shell from the sun gear. As long as there's no reason to, just leave them together during the cleaning process. You can R&R the bushings as it is using slide hammer or you know, shop press and the appropriate size bushing driver. I'm just going to keep this stuff over here as I go through it. Alright, direct drum. You want to check this band surface first and foremost. This one looks perfectly fine. You can put a straight edge with a flashlight to it and check for warpage. The band only does cover you know, a percentage of the drum surface. It does not cover all of it. Okay, you can assess clearance as well. These drums, or these clutch packs, should have about 30 thousandths or so. I'll flash the exact specs on the screen. Alright, so it looks like we have a 4-clutch direct drum. So let's see, friction looks in decent shape, steel plate looks good, friction, steel, no signs of slipping that I could see on the steels. Alright, here's your bottom steel, there's no cushion plate in here. One thing I recommend to folks that are new to a given transmission, well actually two things. First thing I'll mention that I recommend either new builders or folks new to a given unit do is keep all of your consumables. You know, don't throw them out just yet. Because when you get your overhaul kit, your new friction module, steel module, or you know, whatever it is you're installing, and you come upon like a a weird problem where your clearance in the clutch is way off, or something's not right, you want to be able to go back and refer to these old parts. So unless this clutch pack or whatever clutch pack or band is completely torched, in other words, it has no reference or kind of research value to you whatsoever, I would keep them aside and have them just so you can refer to them, in the event you run into some kind of problem, or the transmission throws a curveball at you, so to speak. I'm not going to put them in there. Let me actually go get this snap ring out. One of the things I always try to do is make sure I have contact with all 4 locking bosses. As you can see, this one has 3 of the 4. It's not the end of the world if you don't have all 4, but I try to maintain that general practice across any return spring assembly and snap ring where there are locking bosses to hold it in place. Alright, that's the first thing that I want to mention. The second thing I wanted to mention is, again, if you're not familiar with the unit, keep all of your lip seals or machine cut seals on pistons and other things, drums, whatever, in the same position through the cleaning cycle, so that when you put it back together, if your overhaul kit comes with a whole bunch of seals and all the seals are very, very similar in dimension, it's subtle differences that perhaps you're only going to know either by experience or by directly comparing them, then you have that reference to go back to. Alright, note the configuration here. So you have 3, 3, and 4. It's 10. And I guess the third piece of advice I'll give you is to take a picture of return spring configurations in drums if they're this or like this. And this way you won't ever get confused as to how it should go back together. Alright. Check this bleeder ball. Any and all pistons that have bleed balls, they have to move and make noise. If they don't, then spray a bunch of brake cleaner. See if that will dislodge whatever grit or whatever else is clogging them up or causing them not to function. If you can't, get it to move and get it to work, then obviously you're going to have to replace it. Okay, there's a seal in here. Okay, unlike GM transmissions, there is no dual feeding the direct clutch with Fords. With these transmissions, it's just a machine cut square seal. Goes right there. Like I said, keep it in place if you're not familiar with these units. Okay, that drum is pretty much fully emptied. Okay, rear ring gear, it's within reach, so we'll take a quick look at it. Looks fine to me, at least at first glance. Splines, you can replace the ring gear and the reaction portion of the assembly individually if you need to. Check this surface in here. You don't want to see gouge marks and heavy scoring, things of that nature. That's no good. Alright, let's go ahead and take a quick glance at the oil distributor housing. So again, visual wear is fine, but physical wear is not. Looks okay to me, at least at this point. And as I mentioned in other teardown videos, I really don't inspect anything for real until all the parts have been cleaned up. Okay, forward drum. Got your 3-tab washer there, and then you'll have your bearing. Okay, this is the orientation of the bearing. The inner portion faces you when you're placing it back into the drum. Alright, so I see what somebody has done here. Somebody has placed the apply plate at the backing plate position. Interesting. Let's see how this clutch is set up. So what someone has done here is they have placed a second backing plate, or excuse me, a second apply plate in the backing plate position to squeeze in an extra friction and steel. Okay, I've seen this before. In the forward clutch, this is not terribly risky, because the forward clutch is a non-shifting clutch, meaning once it's on, once you're in a forward pattern range setting, drive, D2, 1, you know, it's not going to come off. So it's not working. It's not taking shifting torque like the direct clutch. Folks will do this with the direct clutch. They'll put an extra forward clutch apply plate in the backing plate position, but in this drum, and on the 2-3 shift, especially if it's aggressive, large orifice size in the spacer plate, it's designed to shift real firm. These will crack. Okay. I've never done it myself, so I've not had that experience, but numerous accounts from builders online, and even a builder friend of mine who had shared with me one that came in where somebody had done that, and this was broken in like 4 different pieces. Okay, there is a little bit of heat on these, which shouldn't be the case. I mean, these are typically not bad unless either A, there was a line pressure issue in the unit, or B, it was just being hot rodded, or even C, it was being aggressively driven in reverse. You will sometimes see this in working vehicles, and especially very heavy trucks that are towing big heavy loads. You're just going to have some slip because it's just being pushed to its absolute limit. Okay, this is the snap ring to the rear planet. Alright, I'm going to get the piston out of there in a second in that forward drum, but again, thrust washers, you can reuse them, but if you find that when you have everything back together and you have too much travel between components, it's recommended that you go back and replace the thrust washers with new. Okay, this is the inboard thrust washer. Looks like there is some sort of contact here. I didn't actually notice this when I first pulled it out. So he's going to need a planet. I mean, I think we already mentioned that, but if there was any doubt at all, this kind of removes that doubt. Alright, rear planet. And with these planets, like all other planetary assemblies, do not be tempted to spray brake cleaner or other solvent into the pinions, and then like zip them dry with shop air. I mean, that'll ruin your needle bearings inside these pinion gears. So there's a set of needle bearings inside each one of these gears, and they revolve or rotate on each pinion. And so you want them to be in good shape. This also has some wear to it. So I have plenty of these planets in stock. I'll have to do some comparing to see to what extent these teeth are worn compared to other good used ones, and if I need to, I'll have him swap them out. Okay. Check these splines here for your forward hub. You want to make sure that you're not running into a situation where you have a clutch disc, one or more frictions getting hung up. Okay, so like getting hung up on the hub. because then you have a potential for no apply, and nobody wants that. So this looks good so far. Like I said, I will eyeball all these parts once they're fully clean. Okay, I recommend you replace these Belleville plates. I don't ever reuse them in the C6s, E4ODs, 40100s. I always replace them. Other transmissions are a little bit more resilient, but on these, I prefer to have them new. All right, let's see if I can get this thing out. That's not gonna work. All right, so you're gonna have your Belleville plate, and then you're gonna have your steel support that protects the piston. So that goes in there like that, and then the piston just comes out, maybe. All right, one potential vulnerability in these drums is that they can crack under real high torque, high horsepower, you know, just a lot of load on them. See it sometimes in the E4ODs and 40100s on trucks with tuning, and you know, just they're putting out gobs and gobs of power. This one does not want to come out. All right, this washer here goes on direct drum. And it's going to force it out. I have enough air left because I shut the compressor off. I want it coming on when we're doing this. And it moved a little bit, just enough to get at it with some pliers. Okay, and you're going to have your lip seal. And then you have an O-ring here on the drum. I mean, if nothing else, we have a good sealing piston, which is always a positive sign. Yeah, this thing is in here. Alright, so that drum's also empty. Okay, let me change the battery out, then we'll go ahead and look the pump, and that'll be it. Alright, this tool I got on eBay years ago. I couldn't tell you who sold it or where, but these things are fairly common and readily available anywhere you go for transmission specific tools. Transmission hard part suppliers will also sell tools as well, and for most transmissions, you know, transmission specific tools as well as general tools like clutch spring compressors and things like this, you know, pump removal tools, snap ring pliers, you know, all that good stuff. All right, that bushing looks like it's been replaced, as does that bushing. And looks like I'm getting a little bit of fluid on me. It's aftermarket gasket, so yeah, someone's been in here before, possibly very recently, so makes sense. But I haven't really found the source of the, you know, all the grit and dirt, and, you know, what appears to be burnt clutch material. So, and these converters don't have clutches in them, so, oh, who knows. All right, 1/2 inch on these bolts. See some, a lot of thrust wear here on the stator. Alright, so when it comes to the pump, specifically Ford pumps, you want to make sure that the bushing, when you install a new one, and this definitely needs to be replaced, you see this oil groove here? This oil groove has to be exhausting inboard toward the gears. So if this oil groove was facing out toward the seal, you would have an excessive amount of oiling pressure forcing its way out toward this seal, potentially blowing the seal out. So you want to make sure that anytime you go back with one of these transmissions, C6, C4ODs, 40100s, etc., you keep that in mind and you make note of where that oil groove is exhausting. And I always install these, the new ones, in the exact same position and orientation, based on how the old one was positioned. Okay, pump gears are generally resilient. You can replace them with aftermarket gears. The areas you want to check if you have intentions on reusing these are the flats and the bevel where the torque converter engages. They can mushroom, they can be heavily worn in this area, and you'll have a very loose fit. Or, in real bad situations, there'll be a lip here that will prevent the torque converter from even going onto and engaging the pump. Alright, check your surface here on the driven gear. Make sure it's not scored up. Okay, if there's like a catastrophic hard part failure and metal is washing through the pump, then you'll have all kind of damage to the gears and to the pocket, and most notably the crescent. All these crescent style pumps are vulnerable on the crescent itself. If there's excessive wear on this crescent, then you're not going to get optimal fluid volume, and this pump is not going to be able to generate requisite pressures, especially in a high performance application, high RPM or heavy duty. So it's a heavy duty transmission by design, and the expectation is going to be used in some sort of heavy duty or possibly high performance application. So the pump, which is the heart of the transmission, has to be healthy and it has to be in serviceable shape. So you have your pump O-ring here, and like I said, I'm not going to even attempt to inspect this thing when it's all dirty like this. Okay, we now have the pump all cleaned up, and I'm cutting in here. I know that this was filmed after the fact, but I didn't actually notice this until after I cleaned it off. And so this is a textbook example of why you want to do your real inspection after you put all your parts through the cleaning cycle. As you can see, this pump body here at the crescent is heavily worn. So you have a transition here from the darker portion of the crescent, which is the majority of it, out to the last, fifth or so, to where it is mirrory smooth and shiny. Okay, this surface feels perfectly fine right up in here, all the way to the other end of the crescent. But as soon as you get to this transition zone, the surface becomes like glass. And when it feels like that and it looks like this, it is worn out and cannot be reused as is. So this will have to be either milled or simply replaced. So it's, again, why I always stress, do your real inspection after you've cleaned up your parts. Because if you do it beforehand, you're going to miss stuff like I did. And that's because, you know, everything's disgusting and you frankly just want to get it out of your hands and into the tank as soon as humanly possible. Let's bring the stator over. Okay, also check your sealing ring groove location here on the inboard side of the stator. This is where your forward drum has its 2 sealing rings for that forward clutch circuit. Again, same deal. Visual wear is fine, physical wear is not. Yeah, this has some hard contact. I'm going to bring this to my machinist, see if he can clean this up a little bit, or even if it's something that we even need to be worried about. I may be able to just take care of this with some sandpaper here, because the journal surfaces look perfectly fine. I mean, you see a little bit of wear, but nothing that would preclude you from reusing this. But this surface right here clearly has some wear to it. You want to obviously eyeball the working surface. Okay, again, a straight edge is what you would use. Now, you can stick this on a lathe, no problem. Anybody with a lathe can resurface this for you. That's fairly straightforward to do. What's not straightforward is the body. If the body needs to be remilled, per se, then you need somebody with an end mill and a program to do it, to deal with that crescent. Basically, they have a programmed offset for their cutting tool, and the mill runs that program with the offset, you know, already installed or programmed, so to speak, and it will cut that pocket perfectly, and you'll install a new set of gears. So unfortunately, the customer doesn't have too much knowledge of the history of this unit. The seller did inform him that, you know, the truck was running and driving. It had the rebuilt engine and this transmission in it, and that kind of aligns with what we see here in the case. You know, insofar as condition of parts and components. It looks like the direct drum. There is some event happening here. It looks like rust. Now, this is not likely from my customer pressure washing it. This looks old to me. This could be cleaned up with sandpaper, but you can see some signs of rust on the drum as I'm looking at it. I mean, there's rust inside the drum. Get this dust washer out of the way. Okay, these bushings do look like they've been replaced. And I didn't mention this when I was going through the drum, but you want to make sure that there is no physical wear here, just like the oil distributor housing. You don't want to see physical wear. You don't want to feel any wear here. Visual wear is perfectly fine. They're all going to have it. Physical wear is not. All right. Check splines here. I didn't mention it. I'll mention it now. These splines look okay. I mean, that's why I kind of didn't mention it. I don't think this is going to be a problem, my personal opinion. I think it just is more unsightly than anything else, but once this is cleaned up, I'm going to eyeball it, make sure it's not cracked anywhere. I mean, that's going to be your main concern. My guess is that components in this case were traveling quite a bit too freely with each other. That's just my guess. Once I go back with it and I measure end play, I'll know that for sure or not. I mean, it's going to get a thrust washer kit. I have plenty of selective spacers or washers for the stator, so that if we need to tighten things up, we can. And like I said, I have a separate video on exactly how to measure for and adjust front end play in these C6 transmissions. Okay, all in all, it's not too bad. No catastrophic damage. Thinking he is going to need a front and a rear planetary carrier assembly. They're not terribly expensive, so you know, we'll look to see what I have on the shelf, or if I need to acquire them from hard part supplier. But apart from that, it's going to get a complete overhaul. So that means the overhaul kit, friction module, steel module, band, bushing kit, thrust washer kit is mentioned, rear roller assembly from an E4 E4100. We're not going to reuse or purchase a C6 factory roller assembly. I never do that. Valve body will receive either a valve body kit or my own hydraulic calibration adjustments per se. The application here is mostly cruising. It's just intended for use on the street. No serious working, towing, hauling, no racing or Baja off-roading, nothing like that. He just needs it to be reliable, and that's it. That's really all he's looking for. Engine's going to have a modest amount of power. It's not going to be putting out 6, 7, 800 horse. So we're going to build it well within the confines of what the transmission was engineered to handle to begin with from the factory. The one upgrade that I always like to do with these is that intermediate servo, and as mentioned, I'm going to install a Sonic Superhold servo in here, and that will pair nicely with the E-ratio lever to give him a lot more holding power in second gear without endangering the transmission in any way. So, alright, that about does it. If there's any other part or parts that I would install in here that I haven't annotated, or excuse me, that I haven't mentioned, I'll annotate. But I think we're good with what we have from a teardown and inspection perspective. So it's time to get all these parts cleaned up and get this thing ready to go back together with. As always, thank you so much for watching. Greatly appreciate your viewership. If there's anything else you want me to cover when it comes to C6 transmissions, go ahead and put it in the comments below, and I will prioritize it for videos in the future whenever the opportunity arises. Until then, enjoy the rest of your day or evening. We'll see you on the next one.